evening, everybody. Welcome to Two Way Tonight. Thank you for joining. I'm Mark Halperin. This is a special broadcast because there's some big stories going on, and we're going to have with us in a moment one of the people at the center of it, Congressman Khanna of California, who, as you know, has been integral in passing a piece of legislation creating unprecedented access to the investigative files of the Epstein matter, and who is one of the few members of Congress who spent time over at the Justice Department reading the files. What he found, he said publicly already, is redactions that shouldn't be there and that the Justice Department says were made by the FBI. And the FBI process, or the Justice Department process, did not involve going back to the FBI and saying you need to unredact these, but simply making the redacted files available not just publicly to the release that everyone got, but also privately to the members of Congress who are supposed to be reading redacted files. So when Congressman Khanna is here, you'll have an opportunity to ask him questions. Great opportunity. You've probably seen him in a one-way format on cable news and elsewhere, but not in two ways. So we'll change the format up a little bit when the congressman gets here. We'll get into that. Two great guests with us tonight as well, who also have an opportunity to question the congressman: Steve Elmendorf, Democratic strategist, and Natalie Winters, White House correspondent, co-host of the War Room podcast with Steve Bannon, and she's never been here before, and we're grateful to have her. She's one of the best young reporters in Washington, the best White House correspondents whose work is watched widely. So while we wait for the congressman, let's bring in our two guests and ask about this issue of redactions. Steve Elmendorf, as opposed to Steve Bannon, welcome in. Natalie, welcome in. Very glad to have you both here. Natalie, start with you. What do you think of just this general idea that they promised disclosure and there's many redactions that don't seem consistent with the law?
I think it's pretty disgusting that you're seeing all this talk of protecting the victims be used as sort of an excuse to redact names that are certainly, I think, well deserved for the public to be able to see them. I think that's really unfortunate messaging. We've advocated on the War Room, I myself, I think since day one of this whole scandal, which has probably been one of the worst messaged debacles in United States history, certainly for the Trump administration, that the best, I think, remedy, the best course of action is complete and utter transparency, not just because the American people can handle it, but I think that the Epstein issue, everybody sort of makes it into their own version of it, when in reality, I think what the American people are really curious about is who was sort of pulling the strings behind this? What does it have to do with an intelligence connection, intelligence community? So I would advocate redacting as much as possible, not in the kind of messaging way, but to actually protect the identities of the victims.
All right, Natalie, thank you for that. Congressman's here. Steve, thank you for joining us. Congressman Steve, rather than telling us what you think, I'll give you an opportunity to ask the congressman the first question, then Natalie, and then members of the community for as long as the congressman has to be with us. So Congressman, thank you. Steve.
Well, I ask you, good to see you, Congressman. I guess my first question is what Natalie said. I've always been an advocate, as have you, of full transparency. I think we all seem to be in agreement here that full transparency was what was necessary. And that's why, unfortunately, you had to pass a bill. They didn't do it before you passed a bill. But having seen what you've seen since the materials come out and since you've gone over there on your own, what do you think is driving the redactions that they're doing, and what can we do to like get to a next step on this process?
You know, I didn't expect to be talking about this story in 2026. I thought we passed the law in 2025. They'd released the files. And, you know, I care about jobs and the economy and AI, and that's what I expected to be doing. And yet I'm there like a first-year law associate in a room with 4 computers, putting in Bates numbers, trying to figure out these documents. I mean, it just has been mishandled, regardless of what you think about it. My view is that they did do a significant release of the files. I mean, let's be clear. They released a lot of the emails. They released a lot of the documents. The problem is that the documents that people most want are ones where survivors talk to the FBI, and those have been redacted, and those were given to the Department of Justice already redacted. And that's 70 to 80% of the files. They need to unredact those, and they need to release them. Now, one other point, some of the redactions are legitimate. Some of the most sensational emails out there are emails, you know, where you read about a 10-year-old girl or others where they've redacted. And some of those are actually survivors who may also have been complicit. And so people shouldn't just assume because it's redacted, it's illegitimate. Some of the redactions were legitimate. It's the FBI redactions that are not legitimate. One final point, and then I'll get to all the questions. I think it's very important that we distinguish between destroying the reputation of every single person who's in the file, who may have sent an email. I'm not for that. I'm not for a witch hunt. What I want to know is who actually went to the island and actually did terrible things, and how can they be held accountable? Not that every single person who's ever mentioned in the file should have some kind of witch hunt.
Natalie.
Just to drill down a bit on the motives, I'm curious how you would sort of parse out, though not mutually exclusive, a lot of the redactions coming more from wanting to protect people who are powerful, who are obviously linked to the Trump administration, or the fact that there could be some IC ties or foreign government ties to Epstein. Is that part of the redaction calculus here, or do you think it's more a personnel aspect?
There are three different things. So first of all, Congress can't compel the declassification of information. So our law actually exempts information that is deeply classified. Some people were upset that our law did that. I said, no one in Congress is going to pass a law saying that declassify things. It's just not how it works. I do believe that the president should appoint a commission to understand what happened with Epstein, who he was, whether there were any ties to our intelligence or others, and then have a report that is issued by someone who has credibility. I have not engaged in just conspiracy theories, but I fundamentally believe that they're unanswered questions, and that should be answered. It won't be answered by my law or Massey's law. The law does not apply to classified information. That has to be a separate thing that the president does. In terms of what was redacted, some of the redactions are legitimate to protect survivors, but the places, one, they were careless in not having all the men that should be out there. I mean, Massey and I, in 2 hours, discovered 6 people, which justice acknowledged should have been out there, and they had incorrectly redacted. But the biggest issue is that in March, the FBI went through and redacted all these things, and those need to be unscrubbed. Now, you can disagree with Massey and me. You can say, well, it's an investigation. There are a lot of, those FBI statements have a lot of untruths. There could be hearsay in them. They're implicating reputations of people who weren't charged. We shouldn't be releasing those. And guess what? The time to make those arguments was in the United States Congress or the United States Senate. But it passed in Massey's law, 427-1 and 100-0. So you don't get to just disregard the law off the land. President Trump signed it. He could have vetoed it if he had those concerns. Now it's the law. The law clearly says that the FBI needs to unredact the files. Your subjective wishes about whether you think that's just or not are totally irrelevant. In America, you comply with the law, and they're not complying with the law.
Okay, I've got questions, but I'm going to hold them and I'll ask another time. Michael, welcome in. Unmute, tell folks where you are and what's your question for Congressman Khanna.
Yes, hi, thanks for having me on. I'm calling in from Manhattan, and I do want to thank you, Congressman, for your push here on transparency. I think it's a really big deal in our country. I'm just curious, what made you get interested in this topic? Because I checked on Grok, I ran all of your tweets through Grok this afternoon, and you didn't tweet once about Epstein from 2021 through 2025. During the Biden administration. So I'm just curious, this came into focus for you last year. Why was that?
Thank you, Michael.
So first of all, it's a very fair question. In 2019, I did tweet out with Elijah Cummings about the Epstein issue, but it was not an issue on the forefront. And what happened is that as I went on candidly on the podcast circuit and in these communities, I started hearing people talking about Epstein. And when Massey and I initially did it, that we should get the files, we actually thought that Trump or others may support it, that there was something that was going to happen. And then I got to meet the survivors, and it became personal for me in a way that it wasn't years ago. And I have said that this is not just a failure of the Trump administration. This is a failure of administration since 1996. And it's not like I'm some silver knight coming in and on the moral high ground. What I've said is that it became real to me after I met these survivors, and that's what made me passionate. That's what made Massey's passionate. But now we have people who are working to rectify a wrong that's happened for decades, and we should do that. And it's not about scoring political points. It's about having justice for these survivors and exposing an Epstein class.
Michael, thank you. Wally, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, what's on your mind for the congressman.
Thanks for calling on me. I'm calling from Southern California. I think I had a different question originally for Congressman Khanna, but with his little statement he gave earlier, I wanted to ask him a specific question. You just said now that you were talking about the law that was passed and how the law people may not like how it was drafted, but the law is law, and we have to comply with the law of the land. That bothers me from the standpoint. It seems like the party you represent is so antithetical to the immigration laws, and right now, at least that's my opinion. I'm just wondering if you can answer that, because it seems like your party is pushing for, basically not enforcing the immigration laws.
Well, I'm just going to interrupt you because we're trying to keep on Epstein. I understand you're making a
I'll
metaphor,
give
but
a
go ahead.
20-second summary.
Yeah.
I think what most Americans are is they believe that the border should be secure. We didn't do a good enough job of securing that border in the previous administration. Many Democrats have acknowledged that, but they don't want to see ICE agents going around harassing American citizens, nor do they want people to be abused the way they are if they're here undocumented, paying taxes and law-abiding. They want to go after the criminals. I think that's an 80% position, and neither party has really succeeded in getting it right.
Mark Ackerman, question for Congressman Khanna.
Good afternoon, Congressman. Thank you for your time today. One thing I'm really curious about is, are we ever going to get to see the batch of suspicious activity reports that the Treasury Department is still holding? There's like 1,000 of them.
That's a great question. Some of that should be released under our law. It hasn't been. Ron Wyden has been terrific at investigating that, and I know his committee is working on doing that. And there are questions of these financial issues. I mean, the thing in England that is really implicated Mendelsohn is this idea, allegedly, that he gave a tip to Epstein about what UK was going to do in buying euros, and that's a undercovered part of this whole story.
Congressman, so have any of those financial reports been released, or we haven't seen any of them?
I have not seen any of them. To my knowledge, they have not.
Okay. And is there any basis to say they'd be exempt under your law?
I don't think so. I can go back. I like to speak precisely, so I don't think so, but I'll confirm afterwards if I'm incorrect on that. Okay. But my understanding is the law covers it.
Yeah. Okay, Matthew Bartlett.
Hey, Congressman, you are just, a remarkable figure, something of a progressive maverick. Just hats off to you. You've also been called, New Hampshire's third congressman. I know you spent a lot of time there. There's a legendary business figure, a tech guy. You may even know, Dean Kamen. He is all over the files. Politico has a massive story out today about his ties to politics nationally and in New Hampshire. Is there anything you can say about Dean Kamen, who's either been wrongfully accused, or is there anything nefarious that you've seen? Again, this is just a massive story. You may know the guy. So many people do. And it's certainly making waves, again, nationally and in New Hampshire.
And for those who don't know him, he's, amongst other things, the founder of the Segway.
Yeah, I've met him once. I think he funded robotics programs around the country, and I've met him. I haven't followed the details. I mean, people think because Massey and I wrote the law, we know all the cases of every single person. But I would just say that when we did this, we didn't care if it was going to hurt Democrats. We didn't care if it was going to hurt Republicans. We didn't care whether it was going to be a Democratic donor. And there should be accountability, and he should come clean in what he knows and what information there is. And if there's something innocent, then he should explain it, but there needs to be transparency, and Democrats need to call for transparency even when it's one of the people who support us. And I've tried to be consistent about that.
Matthew, thank you. Congressman, before you go, just lay out what's coming up ahead. You've asked the Justice Department to unredact the FBI's redactions, but how will this play out? Will you be going back to read more documents? Will more be unredacted? How will this work now?
Look, I can go back, Massey may go back, but having members of Congress go back is like going through an ocean, and saying here are a few more names is not the way to solve this. The way to solve this is for us to approach the FBI. We're going to give the FBI another chance to say, okay, here's what we need to do to give the unredacted files. Massey and I are thinking about what the approach is to the FBI. Of course, Massey will get to question Pam Bondi tomorrow at the hearing. I'm not on that committee, but he will get to ask this. So my hope is that the FBI will comply. And you say, well, why do you think they're going to comply? The administration, of all the issues, Mark, and maybe you would validate this, of all the issues, this is the one issue where they've actually been listening to Congress. They've signed a law against their will. They've disclosed more documents than they ever thought they will. They even are agreeing with Massey and me on the 6 names that they are now releasing. So there is a chance that this pressure will get them to do the right thing. If not, there are the courts that we can go to and intervene, and the survivors can intervene. My view on all of this is this is not helping Donald Trump. And it's not helping Donald Trump not because of people speculating about his place in the files. It's not helping him because every day that there is not information released and it's drip by drip by drip, this stays in the headlines. And for the life of me, I don't understand why he doesn't just tell his team, get it out there, get it over with, let's move on. He wants to move on, get the documents out there. That's how he moves on.
Congressman, grateful to you for making time for a two-way community, answer some questions for folks, and look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, a quick word from a sponsor, and then we're going to talk to Steve and Natalie about a bunch of stuff related to Epstein and ICE and Savannah, Guthrie, other topics. Thank you for being here. Quick word, TakeLean.com, opportunity to try a product that's worked for so many, to lose weight in a healthy way, not yo-yo up and down, not weight cycling, but losing weight in a healthy and consistent way. It's not an injectable. It is an oral supplement, and the science behind it allows you to maintain healthy blood sugar, control appetites and cravings, and burn fat by converting it to energy. Right now, you can try this product to help you lose weight by going to TakeLean.com, using the promo code 2WAY for 20% off the entire site. Don't try a fad diet, juice cleanse, cabbage soup. These things just produce weight cycling where you lose 10 and gain 10 back. It's an opportunity to lose weight in a way a doctor-prescribed, non-prescription product. Go to TakeLean.com, 20% off when you use the promo code 2WAY, TakeLean.com, 20% off. All right, Congressman Khanna said people who are just mentioned in the files shouldn't suffer any consequences necessarily. It's about people who did wrong. Howard Lutnick was on Capitol Hill today testifying and was asked about the discrepancy between his previous statement that he had one dealing with Epstein and then never again, and then the documents suggest otherwise. Here is Howard Lutnick. This is number 4, please.
I think you understand the root of concern here. It's the way you described very emphatically your first encounter with him in his apartment, said you were disgusted, would never have any contact with him again. Did you, in fact, make the visit to Jeffrey Epstein's private island?
I did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. My wife was with me, as were my 4 children and nannies. I had another couple they were there as well with their children, and we had lunch on the island. That is true, for an hour, and we left with all of my children, with my nannies and my wife, all together. We were on family vacation. We were not apart. To suggest there was anything untoward about that in 2012, I don't recall why we did it, but
Mr. Secretary, again, as I said.
Here's this Commerce Secretary with reporters also interested in getting Howard Lutnick to answer questions. Number 6, please.
About your interactions with Epstein? Did you have any financial involvement with Jeffrey Epstein? Why did you keep contact with Jeffrey Epstein after he pled guilty to sex crimes?
Come on, give us some space. Give us some space.
What do you say to the Democrats calling on for you to resign?
Give us some space.
All right, this goes on like this. Doesn't answer. Natalie, the White House says it's time to move on. The president has confidence in Secretary Lutnick. But by what standard is this story still a story from your point of view?
Well, I think you have to go to the beginning of this. I think it's certainly true that Democrats have played politics with this. They were basically silent on it since, I mean, not just before the Biden administration, but for a very long time. But I think this is where the Trump administration is really misunderstanding their base. To be fair, I think it's an issue where there is sort of like a sort of Damocles hanging over the head of anyone who dares to tackle this, anybody who's named in the file. But I think the sort of outright denial and the dismissal of people's very valid concerns over people who are tied lied to Epstein is really just unfounded. I don't think people are trying to character assassinate anyone who's just mentioned there, but people who are lying about their affiliation, or I think what I was sort of asking the congressman about, what I think people are a little more concerned about is how this relates to domestic and the domestic IC, but also foreign governments. And I think to just try to brush it under the rug when we haven't actually had meaningful transparency, it's only going to make the issue, I think, more interesting. And when you see these discrepancies and these lies like Howard Lutnick is engaging in, I think it just makes people even more skeptical.
Natalie, is this a story that will continue to be pursued regarding Howard Lutnick? And B, should it continue to be pursued?
I definitely think it will be. I mean, I think the legacy media will have a field day with this. I'm sure, more conservative MAGA media seems to be following the Trump line and sort of trying to move on. Not all shows. I know on War Room we've been advocating for conditional or additional releases. But I think this is bad. He shouldn't have been so definitive and lying about his lack of association. I think he sort of entrapped himself.
Steve, is this a story that should continue, or Howard Lutnick is not accused of any illegality and we should move on? Although probably maybe should have just said nanny rather than nannies. But
Well, I think look, there are two problems for Howard Lutnick. One, he clearly lied previously. Two, maybe it's not illegal, it's not inappropriate, but it certainly, to me, shows bad judgment. When you know that anybody who had spent a lot of time with Jeffrey Epstein after 2009, after he had been to prison as a sexual predator, to say, I'm going to take my wife and kids to have lunch with the sexual predator, like it's nothing. Like, what were you doing? Like, what was your point? I think it's his story doesn't really all fit together. He clearly had more of a relationship with the guy than he's letting on. And why you would stop by on your boat to have lunch with him after he's gone to jail is sort of beyond any explanation.
yeah, Steve, I take everything you said. From a matter of society's point of view, should Howard Lutnick lose his job over this? Should, not will. Should he?
No, I think for a lot of reasons, Howard Lutnick should lose his job. He's completely unqualified and has not done a good job so far. But look, I think the fact that he lied about something, yes, for that you should lose your job. People have lost their jobs in Washington for a lot less.
Yeah, I've long advocated it be a crime that anyone who lies to a podcast host should lose their job. I feel like that's a good principle. A couple more things on this. First, our partners at Polymarket have a question up. Let's Polymarket this question. Will anyone be charged? Will anyone face criminal charges over the Epstein disclosure? 43% chance. It's been as high as 60%. Will anyone be charged? Today, Khanna read the names of 6 people who powerful men from the Epstein Files, who he says were the government considered co-conspirators. At the same time, the Justice Department has said there'll be no future prosecutions. And Natalie, do you think anybody will be prosecuted?
I wish, but I think there are a lot more clear-cut cases that this administration could be pursuing that they sort of routinely failed on. I don't think the DOJ is necessarily up to task. And like I think we can all agree on, they really have botched the handling of this from a messaging perspective. So I don't think from a legal or criminal, civil, whatever sort of case perspective, they're going to be able to execute on that.
Yeah. Steve Elmendorf, have you ever met your namesake, Steve Bannon?
No, I have not.
You're not. I have many times, Natalie, more than I have. But Steve's a very bright guy, very able guy. And today I saw, Natalie, you talked about legacy media. On my MAGA Twitter feed today, an extraordinary number of people called for accountability for your friend Steve Bannon. And I'm wondering, Steve, for instance, has not released the many, many hours of interviews he apparently did with Jeffrey Epstein. So I don't mean to put you in an uncomfortable position, but is Steve a part of this story, or should he be part of this story?
Are you asking me or other Steve?
I'm asking you first, and then other Steve.
Well, I think we have seen some of the documentary come out. I do believe that Bannon and team are working on releasing additional files that they have related to that. I think too, criticize or lump Steve in with a lot of people who have been trying to keep this under lock and key is not totally valid. I think War Room, all the way from day one, this whole saga started in February when you had Bindergate, and then it was in July when you had, various people from the administration saying there's no there, we need to move on. There was no client list. every step of the way. I mean, I think War Room has actually been one of the few, if not only, shows in the
Yeah.
MAGA mediaverse that has actually meaningfully talked about the issue, gotten to the heart of it, and actually called for everything to be released extremely unredacted. Steve has nothing to hide, but I just think that sometimes people get a little bit of a myopic view on it. War Room has never once said we should redact anything. I'm for releasing everything. So is Steve. He's said it many times. So I don't think that suggests there's anything to hide there.
Is there a known date for the release of the additional portions of their interview?
Um, I'm not totally sure. I know, I believe it was done with Dan Fluette, that's who they did together, and that they've been working. I'm not exactly sure. I've not discussed this with Steve, but I would just point everyone who's kind of freaking out over the Steve and the Epstein stuff. War Room has stuck its neck out, much to I think the anger of the administration,
Yeah.
and continuing to I think sort of affirm President Trump's base, which is our audience, that you're actually not crazy for wanting to get to the bottom of this story.
Yeah, Steve, you're a veteran of the ebb and flow of things like this. People I see in the chat, I don't read it, but I glance at it, are saying this story will never end. Is there an end on this, or there'll just continue to be people poring over these documents and finding people who had associations with Maxwell or Epstein and sort of scrutinize everything?
Well, I think there's an end if people are satisfied that you have put out everything that could be put out in a transparent way. And the reason we're still talking about this today is that they didn't put everything out in a transparent way. I think that's something Natalie and I agree about. And, once they put it all out, again, there have to be the appropriate redactions to protect victims. But otherwise, everything should be out, and then people can make decisions. And, look, decisions are going to get made about people who are not public officials, and it's really just a question of their audiences and their stakeholders and what they think about it. Steve Bannon hasn't been elected or appointed to anything, and we'll see what people think when they see all of the material. But
Right.
we have not seen all the material, and I think a lot of people on the left, the right, the middle are not confident at the moment that they have seen everything that should be seen.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Okay, if you've got questions about this or comments, we'll get to you in a minute. Almost all of you have probably seen the surveillance video and still photos released today from Arizona. Number 10, please. Here's the headline from the Arizona Daily Star. Masked armed person seen on doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's Tucson home. A lot of questions. Everybody becomes amateur law and order producers and detectives in these national stories related to crime. And people are wondering why it is that we're just now seeing this, that these images are disturbing. And the question is, who is this person? Here is a video, again, of this person who now seems to be, this is someone outside Nancy Guthrie's home. Lots of people watch these today. Here's more video. Lots of people watch these today, including the President of the United States. Here's Caroline Levitt, number 14, please.
I apologize for the delay. I was once again with the president. He and I were both reviewing the newly released surveillance footage from FBI in the Savannah Guthrie case on just this heartbreaking situation with respect to her mother. The president encourages any American across the country with any knowledge of this suspect to please call the FBI, who continue to assist state and local authorities who are leading this investigation on the ground. And once again, I will reiterate that the prayers of this entire White House are with Savannah and her family at this time. And we hope this person is found soon and that her mother is brought home safely.
All right, so of course, our friends at Polymarket have a Polymarket on the question of will there be someone arrested? Number 15, please. Will there be someone arrested in this case by the end of February? 60% chance, according to Polymarket bettors, that by the end of the month, someone will be arrested. Natalie, your thoughts on this very odd case where there's lots of debate about what is the current fate of the investigation of Savannah's mom and of how law enforcement is handling this?
Extremely odd, and I will try my best to not become an armchair expert or a criminal sleuth. But look, I think we all know that 24, 48-hour rule, it usually doesn't look good. And I think when you pair that with the really, I would say, unsettling intensity of those videos, those images. That looks like someone who knew what they were doing, very intentional. I believe the person was armed. I think that probably makes those statistical likelihoods even worse for Savannah Guthrie and her family, which was obviously tragic. So I don't know. I don't know what the FBI is doing. I think they probably should have released that sooner, but I digress. But I don't know if they'll have it by then. I feel uncomfortable betting on that, but I'm
Yep.
not sure.
Yep. Steve.
I agree again with Natalie. I mean, it's sort of gross that people are betting on this. And I don't want to be an armchair detective. I've read everything. I watch it. I actually know Savannah's husband quite well. And I don't know her, but you just, it's so, the whole thing is so heartbreaking, and we just are, thinking about them and praying for them, and hopefully we get to the resolution where she is found alive and they can reunite as a family.
Amen. All right. Again, if people want to comment on that or ask questions of our guests about that, they can. Let's switch to another topic. ICE hearing today with the directors of all the major parts of the Homeland Security that are involved in immigration enforcement. The director of ICE, Mr. Lyons, got a lot of questions from Democrats. Here he is. We won't watch the whole thing, but here he is with Congressman Swalwell, a favorite of the president's, who's running for governor of California. This is number 16, please.
Staying on to lead ICE is a decision, and I've read your background. You have a decorated career. You've served in the military. You are what I would call otherwise employable. I think most people would agree this is not the only job that you can get. But since you've been on this job, women have been dragged by their hair through our streets. A 6-year-old child battling stage 4 cancer has been deported, and it turns out he was a U.S. citizen. People are running through the fields where they work. People who've gone to the streets as allies have been shot and publicly executed. It's a decision to stay on at this point. And considering your honorable service in the past and the dishonorable acts that those who have worked for you have conducted, and the disgraceful statements that the leadership above you have said, you now have a decision. Will you stand with the kids who you're supposed to protect, or will you side with the killers bringing terror to our streets? Mr. Lyons, will you resign from ICE?
No, sir, I won't.
Why not?
Because, sir, that child that you're showing right there, the men and women of ICE took care of him when his father abandoned him and ran from law enforcement.
Time has expired.
You never should have gone
Gentleman's
into custody.
time has expired. I recognize the gentleman from
All right, so
Mississippi.
Mr. Swalwell wanted to know if Mr. Lyons would resign. Congresswoman McIver had a tougher question, number 17.
Ask you some questions that you may be able to answer. Mr. Lyons, do you consider yourself a religious man?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yes. Okay, well, how do you think Judgment Day will work for you with so much blood on your hands?
I'm not going to entertain that question.
Oh,
ma'am.
okay, of course not. Do you think you're going to hell, Mr. Lyons?
I'm not going to entertain.
Of course not. How many government
The gentlelady will
agencies-
suspend. The
How many-
gentlelady will suspend.
Chairman?
A gentlelady will suspend. As I said, the issues we're debating here are important to ones that members feel deeply about.
Thank you,
While
Chairman.
vigorous disagreement is part of the legislative process, members are reminded that we must adhere to established standards of decorum and debate. The witnesses are here voluntarily, and I will continue to remind members that while oversight is important, aggressively attacking those witnesses personally is inappropriate and not in keeping with the traditions of our committee.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just asking a question. You guys are always talking about religion here in the Bible. I mean, it's okay for me to ask a question, right?
Steve, that's a member of your party asking the question. So the first question is that an appropriate question?
No. You know, Mark, I've watched, as part of my job, I watch a lot of congressional hearings of all sorts, some that are about emotional topics like this, some that are about unemotional topics like, transactions.
Yeah.
And it is unfortunate that many members of both parties over the last several years have become too performative at these congressional hearings, ask questions that are inappropriate. And again, both parties are guilty of it. Many people do not appear serious. And it's unfortunate.
Natalie, certainly 2 weeks ago in the aftermath of the second death at the hands of immigration officials in Minnesota, Democrats felt both morally and politically determined to get changes. That's what the context in which this hearing takes place. Where's the current debate, as far as you can see, with just 3 days to go before a partial government shutdown, between the Democrats and Republicans on reforming ICE?
Well, I think it's a really interesting juxtaposition between the discussions you're seeing now and Trump 1, right? The divest from ICE. This is a much more targeted, it's much more personal. It's going after ICE agents themselves. It's going after not just reforming, but I think in some cases outright abolishing the agency. But I really dislike the performative nature of these congressional hearings too, in part because I think people focus so much on the rhetoric, these tough questions. And I'm really going, I would say, after more so Republicans now, because what have they ever done meaningfully to stop the flow of illegal immigration, let alone limit the caps of legal immigration? It seems like all these Republican members of Congress like to get sound bites, pretending to be tough on the border, but then when push comes to shove, they never really actually do anything, in part because of who their donors are and the special interests that they serve. So I think these hearings are just sort of performative to begin with. But in terms of reforming ICE, I mean, I don't really understand. I don't really think that there's a lot of issues when it comes to the training. I think if you actually listen to the hearing, you can hear that most people get 3 months of training. And this newfound, I think, obsession with ICE from the Democratic Party, I think the people who allowed over 10 million illegal aliens to pour into this country for 10 years probably shouldn't be lecturing us on how we should be engaging in border security. It was under the Biden administration where a third of the cameras that were on the southern border were inoperable, basically letting anyone come into the country. So now their newfound obsession with, body cameras and policing all these people, I think they should probably focus more on border security than these kind of edge cases when it comes to ICE.
Okay, let's talk about the SAVE Act, which I hear about every day from Republicans. And here's another pie market. Will the SAVE Act be signed into law this year? Number 21, please. Requiring an ID to vote in federal elections. Just a 23% chance. Steve, this is an idea embodied in this piece of legislation, supported by like 80% of Americans, not supported by the leadership of your party. What is it that the leadership of your party believes that the 80% don't?
Well, this is 80%. If everybody knew what was in the SAVE Act, 80% of people would not be for it.
Well, no, the 80% aren't for the SAVE Act. 80,
passport, no, but find your birth certificate. I don't think so.
Yeah.
So it's not 80% of the people are support what is in the SAVE Act.
Well, 80% though support requiring identification to vote.
Well, that is not what this bill does.
Well, it's part of what it does.
But it's not what this bill does.
Yeah. Are you supportive of?
Complicated, and they put a lot of other stuff in there besides it's asking for ID.
Are you part of the 80% of Americans who support requiring ID to vote?
I think it's not a complicated issue. I don't think you ought to have a photo ID to vote. No, I do not. I don't think we ought to make it harder to vote. I think, we have to have ID to get registered to vote. There's lots of things we have to do, but that's a diversion from what the SAVE Act does. I don't think people should have to go find their passports because not everybody has a passport. I don't think people should have to go find their birth certificates because I just had to look for mine recently to get my marriage license. And it's hard to find your birth certificate when you're as old as we are, Mark. And I think there's many women whose names have changed through marriage or divorce. I just don't think I think it's more complicated than just to say we're for the SAVE Act. And they assert that the SAVE Act is just about showing up with a photo ID. And it's about much more than that, which is why Democrats are against it. We could have a bipartisan discussion about what are the best ways to encourage more people to vote. That's fine, but they don't want to have a bipartisan discussion on that. They just want to do something that is not what they say it's doing.
Yeah, Natalie, sometimes in Washington, the White House or a political party wants an issue rather than to get stuff done. I hear the president and Caroline talk about this almost every day. I hear members of the Congress, the Speaker, the Majority Leader talk about it every day. Do you get a sense what's the Republican legislative strategy, since they don't have 60 votes in the Senate? What's their legislative strategy to pass this, or do they just want to talk about it?
I think they really just want to talk about it. I think they're really hammering it on the messaging front. I think one of the most interesting things to me about the bill is that it doesn't actually necessarily even apply to the midterms this year if it were to pass. I know there's an amendment that's been pushed on it that would make it apply retroactively. So I think that's interesting. Obviously, the SAVE Act is something that they've been talking about for a lot of Congresses. But I think one of the bigger issues and why I think the SAVE Act is sort of a weak punch at voter integrity and election integrity, which I would say I do think we need to show identification when it comes to elections. Otherwise, there's nothing that's really stopping me from showing up to the polls and pretending to be Mark or Steve. But I think the ballot curing and the ballot harvesting is an issue that President Trump's base is probably more radicalized about, more focused on, and I think has a bigger impact than non-citizen voting on US elections. But it seems like the messaging strategy that they're really going with is non-citizen voting. I would suggest that they sort of broaden it out a bit, but it seems like they're really hammering that one hard.
Let's talk a little bit. Thank you for both of you for that. Let's talk about politics. Steve, there's rumors that a Republican member of the House is going to resign, and that would push the House majority to, I believe, 217. Does it matter if they're below 218? Is there any impact to that?
Well, it'll be 217 to 214. It's currently 218 to 214.
Yeah.
As long as they still maintain a majority of those who are sitting and present, which they would, they'd still be in charge, and they'd still only be able to lose one vote.
Right. So even if there's a resignation, it doesn't really affect things, except to the extent that the margin of error of other people being absent becomes more
Margin
of a
of error
problem.
is very tough, and I know from when I worked in the Congress in the leadership, you just members have stuff to do sometimes. Members have families, members have weddings, people get sick, people fall off their truck. I mean, it's what they're dealing with now. I have some sympathy for the Republican leadership. It is very hard to run the place, and that's why they're not, frankly, doing quite much at the moment.
Right. Natalie, one thing you'll learn about Steve as you two appear here maybe on a weekly basis is Steve's very clear-eyed about elections. He's not doesn't have rose-colored glasses, but he's very optimistic about his party, and he believes eventually that Charlie Brown, Donald Trump will not pull the football away, and it'll be kicked by the Democrats into majority. Steve, my guess is at this point, because all my sources, including Republicans, are telling me this way, you're pretty bullish on taking the House and maybe the Senate at this point, correct?
I think we have a 95% chance to take the House. We have a lot of work to do. We shouldn't take it for granted, but if the election were today, we certainly would. I think the Senate has gone from a 0% probability 6 months ago to maybe 30%, which is, and trending in the right direction.
Yeah. Natalie, what do you think of those 95 and 30?
I would say I'm quite scared for the midterms. I think Democrats, and frankly, rightfully so. I mean, I think establishment Republicans are doing what they did back post Romney loss in 2013, kind of the autopsy-esque pivot on immigration, where they're backing down off the deportations. They're reframing the mass deportations, acting like there were asterisks on them the whole time, saying that no, it's only the criminals, it's only the worst of the worst. And I think historically, empirically, that is not a successful electoral strategy. And I think that with some of the other issues, obviously, with the Trump administration, I think they're not necessarily adhering always to what it means to be America first, whether it's the foreign adventurism, the regime change stuff. I think that they're really hurting their base. And I think, as we all know, midterms are about mobilizing and galvanizing the base. It's not really about persuasion. The left is very riled up. You guys are knocking doors. You guys are protesting basically everything. And it seems like our base is a little apathetic, or rather, not ambivalent, but I would say apathetic towards what the administration is doing right now.
All right, so here's someone with a totally different perspective. Steve and Donald Trump share some things; they differ on others. They both like Mayor Mondami quite a bit, and yet here's political analyst Donald Trump on the midterms with his Larry Kudlow interview. This is number 24, please.
Fake news that doesn't get the word out. That's why I love doing an interview. We get the word out. But so you ask a question. In 50 years, a president that's won, even a popular president, somebody that's done well. I'm popular and I've done well. I mean, I think we have the greatest economy actually ever in history. Now we have the hottest country anywhere in the world. That's said by everybody. We have the hottest country in the world. I guess I have to sell that because we should win in a landslide, and we'll do everything we can to do it.
Should win in a landslide. Steve, you said 95% if you were looking for signs the Republicans were turning it around. Where would that start?
I think it would start with the president's approval numbers going up. I think it would start with the president's numbers on the economy. I mean, I think his biggest problem is that people's perception is he's not doing enough on the economy. He can say we have a hot economy, but individuals out there aren't seeing it. And what they hear about him every day, and it's not from the fake news, What they hear about him every day is he's focused on Venezuela, he's focused on Iran, he's focused on foreign adventures, he's focused on putting his name on things and on building things in Washington. And, none of that is helping someone out in the country who's worried about the price of their groceries. And I think he's going to have to, and who's managing the economy. He does not send the perception that he is spending his time managing the economy in a positive way.
Natalie.
I also think the youth vote was something that really propelled him in 2024. And I think, sort of to what Steve was saying, the foreign issues, the sort of other sideshow to what people really care about, the affordability, I think is something that is sort of alienating a group of voters who, like I said, it's not necessarily about persuading them on the issues, it's just about mobilizing them enough to get to the polls. And I think the case that President Trump's administration is making your life more affordable, easier, better, you could definitely make that case, but I don't think that it is as cogent or clear cut as it was laid out on the campaign trail.
Great answers from both of you. Quick word from a sponsor, then to community questions, more from the folks. Raise your hands if you want in on the conversation for Steve and for Natalie. Right now, if you're interested in buying some stuff that's luxurious and comfortable, try Cozy Earth. Cozy Earth products. You've seen many people come on this platform and say how happy they are with the bubble cuddle blanket, with the sheets, with the towels. You've heard me talk ad nauseum about the pants. All available to you now, 20% off. Go to cozyearth.com. Use the promo code TWOWAY for 20% off everything on the site. The Baja bedding set is available to you now. The luxury bath towel set is also available. The bubble cuddle blanket, and then the pants. Heard from another one of you over the weekend. It's Tuesday, so yeah, over the weekend, about wearing the pants to a big conference, and everybody acted like they were the nicest pants they'd ever seen. And then, of course, you can wear the very same pair of pants to the beach or to the gym. Go to cozyearth.com right now, buy the magical pants or any of the other products for 20% off using the promo code TWOWAY, cozyearth.com. Thank you for your attention to that matter. David, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind for Natalie and for Steve.
Yeah, I'm in North Carolina, and I just had a question about voter ID. I didn't know you had to have a passport to get an ID, because Steve Elmendorf said most people don't have a passport. Well, okay, fine, but you don't need a passport to get an ID. And the other thing is, he did what Democrats always do. They come up with these pretty rare situations, like, women can't get an ID when they change their name, that it's really hard to do. No, it's not. I mean, my wife did hers in took no time. All she had to do was go to the DMV.
Yeah. David, it's possible to do, but some people might be busy. How do you know that's a rare instance? How do you know? I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just wondering how you know. Just your intuition?
Yeah. I mean, I don't see a great big line of people, women lining up, complaining about the fact that they can't get their name changed. I would think that if it were that prevalent, you'd see a lot more about it. And plus, okay, you don't have the time. Well, if you don't have the time to do something relatively simple like that, then, you must not want to vote very bad anyway.
Okay, Steve, let Steve respond to that. Steve.
Well, they do talk about how you need either a passport or a birth certificate for voter registration. So both of which are difficult. I think we're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist in this country. Unfortunately, Donald Trump has spent a lot of time creating his own fake news that there was some problem with the election, and everything we have seen is that that's not true. And everything we've seen is that the percentage of illegal voting is infinitesimal, like less than 1%. So we're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist, and we're trying to make it harder for people to vote. And frankly, we should be making it easier for people to vote, because, in states where we have mail voting, which I know he doesn't like California and Oregon and Arizona, or not Arizona, but Colorado, you get like 190% turnout, which is what we ought to have. We ought to have more people participating, not less people.
Natalie, you got your birth certificate and your passport?
Of course I do.
Okay.
I think there's a difference between votes and ballots. And I think that the discussion about voter ID, I think that it sort of presents this alternate reality where it's like we can either have everybody has to present, 18 different documents, or you just let everybody register and you have the DMV doing motor voter. For what it's worth, the ID requirements outlined in the SAVE Act are from federal law. It's a 2005 statute, right? Even if you have your ID, you just can bring one other representation or form of showing that you're a citizen. So I don't think that it's all that radical. But I think the issue is honestly less with the idea of these illegal aliens are going to vote. I think it's with what you said, Stephen, when you see these mail-in ballots being sent to random addresses that are being just sort of added to voter registration database bases through the DMV. I think that's why it's important to verify if we're going to be shifting to these non-in-person voting mechanisms, because how can you certify any of that chain of custody of the ballot if you can't even guarantee that the person that it's being sent to is actually a citizen?
David, thank you. Wendy, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind for Steve and for Natalie.
Quick things, just to comment on voting, which is a hot button with me. In the state of Minnesota right now, the Democrats passed a law that undocumented people can get a driver's license. And in the state of Minnesota, they also passed a law that if you get a driver's license, you're automatically added to the voter rolls. You don't have to show any ID of any kind when you go to your precinct. And if you claim that you live in the precinct and you're not on the voter rolls, a person can vouch for 8 people that say, yep, they live in the precinct. Just a verbal vouch, and then they get a provisional ballot, and the provisional ballots go right in with the rest of them. So when we say there's no evidence of voter problems, we don't have any evidence that there's not. There's a million ways to cheat the vote in Minnesota.
All right, hold on. Steve, thoughts on that?
I have a question.
I have no information on that. So.
Okay, go ahead, Wendy.
I don't like comment on things I know nothing about.
Total switch. Here's my question, probably more to Steve because he really watches Democrat politics as well as to Natalie. We have an open Senate seat in the state of Minnesota, and we have Angie Craig, a very moderate, popular Democrat running for that Senate seat. And we also have extremely far left liberal Penny Flanagan, the lieutenant governor. Now, the person who's popped up on the Republican side that those of us conservatives are thrilled about is Michelle Tapoya. So we're really praying that Penny Flanagan gets the nod from the Democrats, because then we're going to have a race. So my question to you folks is, on the insider, watching what's going on in the party and worrying about Senate seats, who do you think is going to end up getting the Democrat nod?
Great question. Natalie, are you following that race at all?
Not really from the Democrat side.
Okay,
It's a
Steve.
one.
Steve,
I am following it closely.
Yeah.
And full disclosure, I am a rabid supporter of Angie Craig.
Yeah.
I know Angie.
Steve,
I love
yeah.
Angie. I think she's going to win. She's going to lose the party nomination at the state convention, but she's going to win the primary, which has been true of many people who've run for the Senate in Minnesota. And if she wins the primary, she's going to get elected senator.
Yeah, Steve, what do you like about her more than Flanagan?
Well, I think Wendy described I think Flanagan is very, very left wing. I think Angie is a moderate, get things done kind of Democrat who works with the other side and tries to accomplish things. And she's been elected multiple times in a swing district in Minnesota where she's had to talk to not just Democrats, but talk to Republicans and build a coalition.
Wendy, my hunch is that Flanagan's association with the current administration will hurt her and that Craig will win. But there's not a ton of polling, and primaries like that are a little bit complicated. When is that primary?
The primaries in the state convention is coming up in May, and the primaries in August.
All right, we got an eternity to go here. Wendy, thank you. Grateful to you. Okay, Aaron, let's try to get you in before we need to go. Tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind.
I'm in Kentucky. I was just going to say about the SAVE Act. The issue for me is that it's about trust in our elections. And if we don't have trust in our elections, then we have nothing. So whenever they say 80% of people support a voter ID to vote, then that doesn't mean 80% of people don't trust our elections, but it's a lot of people. And so there should be some type of urgency in Congress to recognize that that a lot of people are not trusting what's going on. This is on both sides. It was in 2016, whenever I was a Democrat and voted for Hillary Clinton. Then I didn't trust what had happened at first because of all the Russia stuff. And then, now being a conservative and Republican, then 2020, there's a lot of questions, from both sides, there's all these questions about elections, and we're just wanting something that will kind of give us a little bit more confidence in the fact that whenever we go to the polls, that it actually means something,
Aaron, thank you for that. Natalie, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's all this discussion, particularly among the left wing, democracy scholar, Brookings Center type scholars about election skepticism growing in the United States, especially post 2020. But it just sort of seems like they want to beat Americans over the head into accepting the way that we run our elections when there are obviously problems. Anyone who would say otherwise is absolutely absurd. And it seems like they don't actually want to pursue any meaningful changes. And then when we try to talk about meaningful issues, they're just dismissed. So I would encourage the left to actually engage a little bit more on this. And maybe I would just put it through the lens of listen to your own base because they support it.
Steve, one more time. I know you've addressed it, but
I'm totally open to figuring out a compromise. Well, how about you have to show up with a driver's license or a photo ID, but we're going to move election day to Saturday so more people can vote. And we're going to have no excuse absentee balloting so people can vote over multiple days. And that would encourage a lot of people to vote. And if you look at the numbers, there are some people who said if more people voted, it would help Donald Trump because people who are less committed to vote are more likely to be for Donald Trump. So let's try and figure out how can we work together to make it easier for people to go vote.
Natalie, how about election day on Saturday at least?
I would definitely support that. I maybe take a little bit of issue with universal vote by mail. I think historically, anytime you've seen that implemented, it has not worked well. It's rife with fraud. But I think if you were to put in meaningful citizenship verification, I would also maybe add to that, I think the ballot curing and ballot harvesting dates and timeframes on that. I mean, it's like months after elections. I feel like you can still turn in ballots. So I think there's needed reform there too.
Yeah. Let me sneak in one more sponsor and then we'll finish up with Steve. And maybe another question in Natalie. Free quote on on life insurance. If you don't have life insurance, you're the main breadwinner in your house. You got to do something about it. You cannot leave your family unprotected in case something happens to you, where they still need to make payments for things like mortgages and rent and college tuition. You can get a quote in as little as 10 minutes from ethos.com. It's an online platform. Makes getting life insurance very easy. You can get a quote in under 10 minutes and get up to $3 million in coverage. Go to ethos.com right now. /2way, and you'll get a free quote. ethos.com/2way. In as little as 10 minutes, it helps you provide financial security, peace of mind for yourself and for your loved ones to keep up with payments no matter what happens to you. Not a complicated process. There's no health exam. You just answer a few medical questions. And again, in as little as under 10 minutes, you can have $3 million in coverage, up to $3 million in coverage. Application times may vary. Coverage rates may vary as well. Go to ethos.com/2way to get a free quote. Natalie, how long have you been covering the White House?
A few days into the administration, I got my press pass.
Yeah. And how many times had you been to the White House before you started covering the White House?
Only a few times in Trump one. I had friends who worked in the admin, so I watched some debates there.
Yeah, and I'm sure you get this all the time. What's about covering the White House that's different than people perceive?
It's not glamorous. I don't know if people perceive it that way. The room's really small. It smells bad. Left-wing media does not like us there, and it's really, really, really cold or really, really hot.
Yeah, and when your family's asked what you do for a living, what do they say?
They love it. They're supportive. I'm super blessed, but my dad's always like, just be safe. And I will say the White House press, Pebble Beach, is very exposed, so it's a little concerning. But
yeah, although they shut down the streets, so it's not as exposed as once was. Steve, if you were lecturing a group of young White House correspondents, what advice would you give them about how to best do their job?
My advice would be to look for sources who are not the obvious people. Again, it's a very small place. I spent a lot of time in the White House when I worked on the Hill, when Bill Clinton was president, George Bush was president. And there's a lot of important people who everybody's chasing around, but there's a lot of people underneath those people who are also important, who know a lot. So if I was a reporter, I'd be haunting the coffee shops nearby and trying to find the 25-year-old who's the assistant to the chief of staff, but who might know a lot.
Natalie, do you already do that?
We're very well sourced. I try not to take advantage of the fact that I know so many people in the admin, but I think as you can tell even from today's interview, I get a lot of flack for being, a Trump sycophant and covering them only positively. But I think War Room sort of outflanks them from the
Yeah.
right. So we focus more of our reporting on holding them to account as opposed to the, inside baseball stories.
Yeah. And if you both were to apply a single adjective to JD Vance, one word, what would it be? Steve?
Oh, disingenuous.
Natalie?
I'll go with Mimi.
Mimi. Mimi, that's a good one. It's a good word. Very grateful to you both, Steve, to come back as you do, and Natalie, first time here. We hope you'll come back as well. And of course, grateful to Congressman Khanna as well. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, the morning meeting will be here. My guest co-host will be two fan favorites. Larry O'Connor will be here, and Kevin Walling will both be here. We'll see you at 9 a.m. in this program. We'll be back tomorrow night at 5 Eastern Time. And my new episode of Next Up is posted. My reported monologue on why Democrats are so fired up about John Ossoff's speech from over the weekend and why a lot of Republicans are looking at the message embedded in that speech and maybe a little bit concerned. And then a new book out, #1 New York Times bestseller, on how China and Mexico have exploited the immigration loopholes in this country to do things you cannot imagine. That's available now as YouTube and as a podcast on Next Up. And again, I'll see you at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Congressman Khanna. Thank you all for being part of 2 I'll see you in the morning.